Okay, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my July wrap-up. I'm hoping to get this video out sooner than I got my last video out. If you hear strange noises in the background or you see something climbing on my back, do not be alarmed. That is the reason why my last video was so late. I kind of unexpectedly adopted a stray kitten and she has been completely wreaking havoc on my life, but I love her a lot. Oh, here she is. Come say hi, Bee. This is Bee. Okay, you don't want to be here right now, that's okay. So let's get into the actual wrap up. So the first book I read in July was The House of My Mother by Sherry Frank, which is a memoir written by one of the children from the Frank family who were kind of notorious, a notorious family vlogging channel under the name 8 Passengers. I remember seeing like some outcry about that family when the original video of the mom, Ruby, saying that her son didn't have a bed and slept on a beanbag was first released. I remember seeing some like outroar about that and like having people who had been following the family for a long time be like, yeah, like we've noticed this, we've noticed that like it seems like there's a little bit of abuse going on in the family, whatever. And this is from one of the oldest daughter, I believe, and how she basically got out of the family pretty early thanks to YouTube and like going off to college, but how she struggled to get the Utah authorities to take the threat to her siblings seriously until it was like far too late and they had been horrifically abused by Ruby, their mom, and another woman, Jody, who like kind of was the owner of this MLM. Her beliefs basically infected Ruby and made her treat the kids worse and worse and worse. I thought this was a very harrowing memoir, and obviously I think it is so great of Sherry to share her story. I really commend her for not only surviving what she's been through, but going on to live a happy, healthy life and getting this book deal and like sharing her story in her own words. It's always hard to critique memoirs because you don't want to feel like you're critiquing that person's story or like shaming, like taking away from that bravery that it takes to share your story. And I didn't think this was a badly written memoir at all, but I did think, I don't know, it's just an interesting dynamic because Shari has not left the Mormon church, and so she can't really see or at least acknowledge how their beliefs set up Ruby for the kind of abuse that she like how those beliefs are why she thought she could treat her kids the way she could, and those beliefs, that kind of cultish mindset, is why she fell for Jody's cult. Like because she is still in the system, cannot really see the part that the Mormon church did play in Ruby becoming the person that she was and treating her family the way that she did. And I feel bad for her, and like obviously I know that a lot of the time it's really, really hard to leave the Mormon church. They make it very hard to leave the Mormon church, and it's against such a, I don't want to say cultish environment, but like such a tight-knit environment that it's so hard to break out of it, especially if you live in Utah. And people who have been through these horrific situations turn to religion and turn to their faith in order to find meaning and comfort in their lives. So I understand why she is still in the church, and I understand why she's not completely ready to be like, yeah, like they played a big part in it, but to me that took away a little bit from her analysis of the story, because I feel like at the end she just kind of wants to slap this label of narcissist on Ruby and have that explain all of her behavior and why she did the things that she did, when I think in reality like there was probably also some kind of personality disorder going on there. But I do think a large part of why Ruby thought she could do what she did is because of the teachings of the Mormon church. So, and next I read The Winged Histories by Sophia Samatar. I read a couple other books by Sophia Samatar last month, really enjoyed them, but had some critiques. And then I read The Winged Histories. I absolutely loved this book. This is probably one of my new favorite books, definitely of the year, maybe overall. It just really, really hit the sweet spot for me. It's this story about these 4 women at war, basically, before, during, and after the war, and it kind of flips the whole concept of a war story on its head, because the actual action of the war happens in these very brief little like TLDRs at the beginning and ends of the chapters, and the vast majority of the chapters is, we're gonna throw this away from me. The vast majority of the chapters are a very internal moment in these 4 women's heads, in their POVs, as they are going through a moment of like great crisis or like a turning point. And I found that to be so fun and so different and unique from like a typical, again, war story. And it really wanted to examine the concept of a war story, whose stories get glorified, who gets left behind, what about war is so appealing to people. And I felt like it balanced the concept of like necessary violent revolution and the actual reality and horror of war very well. And then the 4 women were so different, and seeing how they move through the world in different ways and how their experiences were different and also similar. I loved it. And the prose was so beautiful. I love Sophia Samatar's prose. I loved it in A Stranger in a Laundrette, and I loved it even more here. It is very lyrical, dense prose, but one that I just personally love. And I'm not usually a huge flowery, like over the top prose person, but like this hit for me. This really did it for me. And I just loved The Winged Histories. So I really highly recommend that book. Then I read The West Passage by Jared Petchacek. This is one of the shortlisted books for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction, which I am attempting to read all of the nominees for. This one I was really excited to read, and it seemed so right up my alley, but unfortunately it just didn't hit for me. I don't think this is a bad book by any means. I just think it is trying to do something particular, and what it is trying to do doesn't super appeal to me. And then I also think that what it is trying to do, it maybe didn't completely succeed in. Like, this book is very purposefully trying to mimic like a kind of medieval romance style of story, romance in like the historic sense. It is very purposefully mimicking like the Canterbury Tales, other medieval literature from that time period, and so it's very much like a character going on a journey, and they get interrupted on that journey, and they have a long discourse with a character who represents some sort of like moral belief or side to an argument, and either they have their mind changed or they don't, and they successfully argue their point, and then they continue on to their final decision, and oh no, they've gotten stopped again by some person, and they have to talk to this person. And I just don't super love that style. I don't love it in the Canterbury Tales, and I don't love it in a modern book. It's just, I don't know, the stop and start pacing does not work for me, and I often found that in this book it took away from, there was no kind of overarching tension for like, oh my god, they're stuck in this place, like we have to get out of here. There is this kind of lingering threat of this beast that has awoken and like it's gonna destroy the whole palace, but the beast never really feels like a true and present threat, and that again is purposeful, but like just because it's purposeful doesn't mean it's good. Like, I just felt like there was no sense of overall tension in this book, despite the fact that there's this like eldritch beast coming to kill them all, and I'm like, how does that happen? How do I feel like there are no stakes in this book when it's like an apocalyptic level threat? Like the inside flap of this book, the summary that is printed on the inside flap, that these two main characters are going to face the beast together, literally does not happen until the final 50 pages, which like is just false advertising. I also liked the idea in this book that gender is very changeable and like is kind of based off of your class / job in society. I love that idea, but I thought the execution of that idea was not done super well in this book. Like, it's almost treated as like a plot twist or like a surprise. That idea is never brought up until it happens to one of the main characters and they change genders in the middle of the story. So instead of getting any meaningful like conversation about gender and like the way that gender changes throughout the course of your life in this book, like whether this character knew this was going to happen when they got this job or it was a surprise to them, if they were happy being the previous gender they were and now they're kind of upset that they're a new gender, or whether that was like why they picked this job, like they always wanted to be that gender. Any of those concepts, the things that I think would be really interesting to explore in a world like this where gender is based on your job, none of those things are brought up or explored, because it's like it's treated as like a surprise, and then once we have that surprise happen, like it's brushed past really quickly because we have to get back to the plot. Like it's pretty late in the game, and like we don't have time to talk about gender. We gotta go defeat the beast or whatever. So I thought that was kind of like a missed opportunity to really have those interesting discussions about gender in this world. And I don't even know how to really describe my problems with this book's writing style. I just think it has very basic, plain fantasy prose, and it tends to be very dense and very description heavy. And again, this is purposeful. Like, it's trying to paint a picture of this very weird world for you, but the very plain prose, dense prose just didn't work for me. It reminded me a lot of the experience of reading Wheel of Time, which I very famously bounced off of, because it's just like pages upon pages of describing every aspect of the room, every floor tile, every detail of the wallpaper, what everyone is wearing and what everyone looks like, and that just causes my brain to go to sleep. Even if everything in the room is interesting, even if everything in the room is weird, it just causes me to go to sleep. I can't deal with it. It's too much. It's too much description. I feel like that level of description worked a little bit better for me in The West Passage than it did in The Wheel of Time, because again, it's a very weird world and you do get those interesting descriptions of different places. Because of how weird that world is, I wanted the prose to be a little bit more weird and experimental as well. Like, my favorite parts of the book, and the parts in which I thought the prose was the best, were when the ladies showed up and the prose got really weird to match them, or in these little interludes where we're hearing from weird creatures in this world or whatever. So I liked those elements of the book. And what else did I like about this book? Despite not me liking the plot structure of the Canterbury Tales in this book, I really did like what this book was doing with engagement with medieval forms of storytelling. And the medieval influence has a lot of themes and is in really interesting conversation with the book's themes of class, tradition, decay, stuff like that. So I did enjoy that aspect of it. I just didn't think the plotting was done very well. And then I did like the world building in this book, even though I didn't love the description of the world building. I loved how Pashek played with language in this book, using really familiar and commonplace terms like beekeeper, lantern, whatever, to describe these really weird made up creatures. So like he would say, you know, they found a lantern, and you'd be like, I know what that is, and you'd be picturing it in your head. And then the more the characters interact with this object, or the more the story describes this object, you're like, that's not what I thought it was. That's not what I know a lantern is. And I really liked that. I liked that disorienting effect of common words for uncommon things. So that was a really cool aspect of the book as well. Also, something I have to shout out, there's illustrations in this book. There's like medieval illustrations in this book, and I loved all of them. They were done by the author himself, and I thought that was really cool and done really well. So didn't love this story, but like I appreciate what it's trying to do, and I think it's definitely better than some of the other entries on the Ursula K. Le Guin shortlist. Speaking of being better than some of the other nominees on the Ursula K. Le Guin list, next I read Blackheart Man by Nalo Hopkinson, which was also nominated for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize. This is probably the worst book I've read for that list. I have no idea how this was nominated. I have to imagine that it was because Nalo Hopkinson is just such a well-respected and well-regarded author in the fantasy sphere, and like it's just because like it's a work from a very well-respected, very amazing, talented writer. Because Blackheart Man genuinely feels like a first rough draft of a book. It legitimately feels like, again, Nalo Hopkinson handed in this rough draft, and then the publishers were like, because you're Nalo Hopkinson, we're just gonna publish it. We're not gonna edit it at all, or like, we're not gonna edit it at all. There are legitimately things in the first chapter of this book that vanish and go away after the first chapter and never come back in the story, not even at the end as like a bookending measure. Like, I was so confused at the fact that there are multiple perspectives in the first chapter, and then they're just gone throughout the rest of the book. They never come back. We only get those tiny paragraphs in the first chapter of those people's perspectives, and it was weird because I felt like this book honestly needed those other perspectives. The person we're with for the majority of the book, Vekasi, is honestly one of the most annoying protagonists I've ever read in my life, and I like unlikable, annoying protagonists, but Vekasi was just so irritating and so emotionally dense and treated everyone around him so poorly, especially the people who love him and care about him and treat him really well. I could not believe that supposedly this man was engaged to be married to two people before the events of the story happened, because he doesn't even seem to like them or treat them well. They treat him so well and are so interested in him and are so excited to be married to him, and he just basically treats them like booty calls. It's ridiculous. And the fact that he gets two more love interests over the course of the story, I was like, why does anyone like this guy? He does not change enough over the course of the story to make me feel like I really got to see him grow and change and, like, you know, felt attached to him at the end of the story. I was just annoyed with him all the way through. And Vekasi is not actually super involved in the overall actual plot of Blackheart Man. So it's like a lot of stuff happening off page while we follow Vekasi's like slice of life adventures. And again, I don't want to see his slice of life adventures because I don't like him. So I think this book would have been a lot more interesting, a lot more engaging for me if we did get to see those other perspectives from, like, I don't even know how to describe him. He's not really an antagonist, but from someone who is working for the other side, this like invading colonizer side, and the titular Blackheart Man. I think if we had gotten those perspectives throughout the course of the novel and had gotten to see how the other players off page are like making us go from point A to point B to where Vekasi does come back into the plot at the very end, I think if we had gotten that, it might have been a little better. And then I don't know, there's just a lot packed into this little story. It's quite short. It's not even 400 pages. There's a lot going on. I felt like it started off really well and then just like didn't really follow through on anything it introduced. Again, this one was quite disappointing. I'm still gonna read more from Nalo Hopkinson. I think I've read a couple of short stories from her, and I know, again, she's very well respected and very well regarded in the sci-fi fantasy sphere. I really want to read Brown Girl in the Ring and Midnight Robber. So this one is probably just a fluke. I don't know what happened with this one. Next, I read Will Do Magic for Small Change by Andrea Hairston. This is the first book in the Cinnamon Jones series, and the second book in the Cinnamon Jones series was nominated for the Ursula K. Le Guin Award. So I read this one first, and this is interesting because this book came out in 2016, and the second book, which was nominated for the 2025 Ursula K. Le Guin Award, came out in 2024. So it was a very long time in between these two books, but I was so, I was like, do I really want to read the first book in this series just so I can read the second book for this award? Like, this is so lame, whatever. How could they nominate a second book in a series? But this book was so good. This series was so good. I ended up loving the Cinnamon Jones series, and now I'm glad that they nominated that second book because hopefully it makes people read this series and go back and read the first book and read the second book because it was nominated for the Ursula K. Le Guin Award. I just loved this story. Like, it hit this really nice balance between feel good and like tragic, and like enough sad stuff happening that I did feel like it wasn't just all sunshine and rainbows. I found both Cinnamon and Taiwo's stories to be equally as interesting, and I was really impressed at how distinct and different their narrative voices were. Cinnamon sounds convincingly like a teenager in the 80s I think she lives in Philadelphia. She sounds convincingly like a teenager. Her internal monologue is so different from Taiwo's, and Taiwo sounds convincingly like an immortal genderless alien who is living in the 1800s with his throuple. Like, they were so distinct and yet so realistic for their characters, and I was really impressed by that because I feel like a lot of the times when we have multiple perspectives in a story, they all end up sounding the same because they're being written by the same person. So I really appreciate it when you can have two perspectives that are so different. Like, you can tell just by giving me a line out of one of these characters' perspectives, and I could probably tell you who it's from because they sound so different. They don't talk the same. I really liked seeing how everything came together in the end, even though like it kind of dragged from like 50 to 70% and then rushed a little bit at the end. But overall, I just really liked seeing how the two stories came together and how, oh my gosh, hi, and how they ended up being linked. There are 3 thruples in this story, and I liked all of them. All 3 thruples in the story were great. And overall, I just really enjoyed the story that is about family and magic and performance. And I also found it really interesting how this story kind of discusses, or at least brings up, the concept, like the history of performance, and how not a lot of people in theater want to talk about this, but like the history of performance and the history of theater, especially in the United States, comes from like minstrel shows and from these like exhibitions of savages, like taking random people of color, making them pretend to be like a certain tribe or like a certain clan from Africa or whatever. And the way that this book actually did want to discuss those themes and why somebody would act in a performance like that, knowing how like, derogatory it was and how dehumanizing it was, why someone would do that, was so interesting. And I think that's like not something we see a lot, again, in books about performance. So that added a little bit something extra to the story for me, and I really enjoyed seeing that commentary happen. Yeah, so I really enjoyed that one. And I'll also talk about Archangels of Funk here as well. That book was nominated for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction, and it's so different from Will Do Magic for Small Change. Will Do Magic for Small Change is like a story about family and grief set in the 1980s around the perspective of a Black teenage girl. It's got a little bit of magical realism and a little bit of like historical magical realism, but it's mostly pretty grounded and down to earth. And then Archangels of Funk is like a post-apocalyptic hope punk dystopia about sci-fi like magic story about Cinnamon putting on an arts festival at the end of the world. Like that's so different, but I loved it. It like still had the same heart and charm and soul that Will Do Magic for Small Change had, and it was still so fun to read. I loved reading Cinnamon. I loved the return of the throuple. I loved the concept of like a dystopian novel centering this like hippie commune who like still put on arts festivals. I loved the discussion of like what art is going to look like in the future, especially once like the apocalypse happens. I loved the discussion about greed and like the concept of sharing resources. Everything. I just loved it. I loved Cinnamon Jones. I think that I probably preferred Rakesfall just a teeny bit more, but I would be so happy to see Archangels of Funk win the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize because I definitely loved it. It's one of my favorites from that list, and maybe one of my favorites overall. I really do want more people to read this series because it's just fantastic. Then I read Navigational Entanglements by Aliette de Bodard. I just gotta stop reading novellas from Aliette de Bodard because I've read like 3 at this point, and just the concepts are so interesting, and then I just don't think I've ever read one that is executed to my satisfaction from this author. And this book was no different. Like, Navigational Entanglements picks up a lot in the latter half, especially in terms of like the plot and how interesting it is, but overall I think it just has some significant issues dragging it down and making it so that it's not really a novella that I am super impressed with. Despite this novella's really dense info dumping early on, I just never felt like I truly had a grasp on the world and like the politics and the characters, and like it feels like it expects you to already know what's going on, especially in regards to some of the characters. Like, I seriously had to look up if this was like part of a series in the middle of reading it, because it just felt so taken for granted that the reader already knew who what's her name, especially Hawkcook's mentor in particular. Felt like we were supposed to already know him and like be really upset and impacted by how their relationship ends up unfolding over the course of the book, when like I saw someone else mention this in the Storygraph reviews. I think the way they phrased it was so funny. It was like, I'm supposed to be impacted by a character whose presence in the story amounts to 2 phone calls. Like, how am I supposed to feel bad that like her mentor has betrayed her or whatever, when I only knew him for like 2 lines of dialogue, not even present in the story? I don't know. It was just a lot to ask of me. And I also really struggled with the central romance between the 2 characters, Hawkcook and Vitni. I just didn't believe in their relationship. I liked the idea of their dynamic, like these 2 weirdos who kind of accept the fact that the other is a weirdo, like, but their dynamic, their relationship developed so fast, and the chemistry between them just really wasn't there for me. Like, they are actively telling each other I love you after knowing each other like for 2 days, and I just never bought it. I just didn't understand. In a novella, getting 2 characters from being utter strangers to telling each other I love you and like I want to be your girlfriend within, again, like a week, is just a lot to ask of the audience, and it never felt genuine or really earned from the book, from the story. Like, I truly wish and think it would have been better if like you can have that like very instant like I'm kind of obsessed with this weirdo dynamic between them, but just like don't have them tell each other I love you. Don't have them like label it as this all-encompassing romantic interest at the end of the book. Like, just have it be kind of ambiguous. I think it would have been a lot better. There's just no tension or subtlety in their dynamic, because you know from the very beginning that they're attracted to each other, but like they're not going to act on it for these stupid reasons that they both come up with. And so I don't know, I just never felt very invested in the relationship or how it was going to play out. And because the relationship is so forefronted and such a big part of this novella, the character development with the individual characters, the main characters and the side characters, just didn't get a lot of time. So I also didn't feel like the characters themselves really grew or changed over the course of the story or really impressed me. So overall, I mean, this is a novella. It's a fairly quick read. It's got some really interesting ideas and world building elements, but I think it would have been better, honestly, as a full novel with like more time for character development and world building, because as a novella, it just wasn't cutting it. And I do want to say, if you enjoyed the world building in this novella, I would give Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon-Ha Lee a try. The world building in the Navigational Entanglements reminded me a lot of the world building in Nine Fox Gambit, not in like a plagiarism way, but just in a way that they were kind of similar, and I like them both. So, and then I read The Isle in the Silver Sea by Tasha Suri, which I got as an ARC from NetGalley, and this is Tasha Suri's new adult fantasy novel. It comes out in October 21st, and I was really excited to read this one because, first of all, the cover is gorgeous, probably one of the best covers I've ever seen, and the concept was so interesting. It's about this version of England where they all stay on the island, and it's like been taken over by this fairy queen, and there's magic on the island, and some people are born as incarnates, which means they like fill the role of a particular story or fairy tale, and like they are destined to live out that fairy tale over and over again. So there are these like fairy tales and folk tales that everyone knows that are like played out again and again and again through history. So I love that concept, and I thought it was so fun. And I have really enjoyed Tasha Suri's other series, which I'm going to talk about a little later in this video, but sadly I did not love The Isle in the Silver Sea, and it's not horrible, it just didn't live up to my expectations, and I think it has a lot of holes in it. Like, it's too close to publication, I think, for really anything to be fixed, and I don't think anything will be. Like, why is Tasha Suri gonna listen to me, some random reviewer on the internet who what do I know? But like, let me break it down for you and tell you exactly what I had a problem with in this book, what didn't work for me, and you can decide if I'm an idiot or not, Tasha Suri, if you're watching this video, which I know you're not. So, firstly, the world building. The world here is like a mishmash pastiche of, stop it, get away from me, of Renaissance London, fairy tale stories, English folklore, and modern elements, and I don't think the way it was done really worked for me. Like, I like the idea of all those things being combined together, but the execution just didn't work for me. The modern elements really threw me out of the story, and they felt like they had no place in the story. Like, I don't know, like, just take that out and just have it be Renaissance London. I don't know why there are modern elements in this story. They always come out of left field and feel uneven. So that didn't entirely work for me. And it also didn't work for me that every location in this book, like, the names of locations are very vague. Like, they're called the Archive, the Tower, the Green Library, the Copper Mountains, and every other country in the world outside London is simply referred to as elsewhere. But then London actually does exist, and it's just called London. So are we in a fairy tale version of London or not? And I think this could have been commentary on how the queen, the fairy queen, has isolated the isle and is trying to make it like the center of the world and trying to discount all the other countries that exist. And so I kind of expected, like, for other places to start being named and revealed over the course of the story as the queen's power is, like, waning, but that doesn't happen. The only other real place we get name dropped in this book is not even a name, not even the name of a country, it's a language, and it's Welsh, and it gets dropped at the very end of the book. So I'm like, I wish this book had picked a lane, whether it wanted to be in a fantastical version, the Isle, very vague fantasy world, or a real version of London that the queen was, like, obscuring, and that again got weaker as she also grew weaker. So I thought the plot in this book was bizarrely paced. The pacing is bonkers, and it genuinely feels like the whole first 50% of this book could be pared down majorly to being 20% or even a single prologue chapter. Like, the first 50% of this book is so drawn out, and then in the second half we get, like, this soft reset, and it kind of ends up being pointless setup. So why do we have to spend so much time on that? From the 50% point onward, the plot is a lot more engaging, but it relies so heavily on you being invested in the things that were set up in part one that again then get, like, totally reset and, like, brought back to point zero, that I just had a really hard time buying into the emotional impact of the second half. And it's trying to be very emotional, but, like, I just couldn't really get invested or buy into or feel emotional about all these things that were happening. I wish we had gotten more of, like, a character in this book kind of going through a second childhood with characters that they knew from the first half, and then kind of realizing that happened, that she had, like, lived these two lives. I thought that concept again was so interesting, but then we spend so little time on it because we are focusing way more on something else, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Another reason why the emotional impact wasn't really there for me was the writing style of this book. I think Tasha Suri was trying to affect this, like, fairy tale / medieval writing style with this writing style, which is very different from the writing style of The Burning Kingdoms, which I like. I like the writing style of that book. I think it's great. But in here, it's very kind of formal, almost Victoriana, like fairy tale-esque, very much of, like, descriptions and not very much emotional impact. Like, again, very plain, like, telling everything to the audience kind of internal dialogue, internal monologue, and I didn't love it. I feel like the writing style, you can tell that Tasha Suri is putting on a style. It doesn't feel natural. It ends up, again, feeling very formal and stilted. Characters just tell us everything they're thinking and feeling and doing with no kind of subtlety or sense of emotion, and so I found it really hard to be impacted. I feel like Tasha Suri tries to include these very beautiful poetic lines in this story, but they just never felt natural within the text itself to me, because the rest of the story is otherwise so plain and dull, honestly. And again, another reason why I think there wasn't a lot of time in this book to explore some of these really interesting themes and concepts that are set up. Okay, B, stop. Was because this book is really at its core a romance. And the other things are just side plots. The main plot is the romance between Simran and Veena, and I just could not buy into this romance. I'm sorry, I just really didn't like it or really buy into it ever in the story. The pacing and writing style were definitely big factors in this. These girls are speed running their romantic arc. They go from enemies, well, I mean, like, one-sided enemies. Like, Veena always likes Simran. Simran's just kind of standoffish at first. Stop it. And then they go from that to lovers, to strangers, to soulmates, to enemies, to so quickly that I was just getting emotional whiplash, and none of these changes feel natural. They don't spend enough time with each other in the first half of the book for the second half of the book, where it's like this big journey of them trying to get back to each other because they love each other so much, to feel natural. I'm like, you guys knew each other for like 2 weeks, and Simran, you hated her the entire time. So like, what's with this, like, I have to get back to her, like, I love her so much. Never really buying it. Tasha Suri tries to have her cake and eat it too with this concept of incarnates, and this was kind of one of my big issues with the romance and with the themes in general. So Simran and Veena are incarnates, and they're stuck in the story of the Knight and the Witch, which is about this evil witch and this knight who goes to kill her and then falls in love with her and then ends up killing her anyways. I think the concept of the incarnates and like being trapped in this cycle of fate is so interesting, and you could really use it to explore the concepts of fate and destiny and being trapped in a role and either playing into it or breaking out of it, and what that means for Simran and Veena as like immigrants in a foreign nation to be like trapped in that nation's story instead of their own. But because the Knight and the Witch are both enemies and lovers in that original story, no matter what Simran and Veena do, they both are and aren't fulfilling their roles as incarnates. It doesn't matter what they do, they're Schrodinger's incarnates. They both are and aren't obeying their roles and disobeying their roles. It's like, I wish that Tasha Suri had just picked a lane, and instead of trying to do both of them at once, had the Knight and the Witch story be 2 enemies or be 2 lovers, and then have Simran and Veena actually be able to meaningfully either fit into that narrative or break out of that narrative. Instead, they're just kind of in this weird gray area where it doesn't really feel like they are either trapped in this narrative or breaking out of it. I also think that if Simran and Veena had just been like childhood best friends, and then turned into incarnates instead of being strangers, I think that would have strengthened the relationship a lot for me, because I think a lot of why I can't really get invested in that dynamic is because they're strangers at the beginning of the story. They meet in the beginning of the story and then are like trapped with each other on this like mission for like, again, 2 weeks. And then they're separated for a really long time again. So it's like, how can I be invested in this romance when it feels like they barely know each other? And because the romance is such a forefront in this book, the other like actually interesting themes about censorship and immigration and what it means to be part of a story really fall to the wayside and like just aren't explored thoroughly, in my opinion. This story toys with ideas of like English cultural censorship and anti-immigration, but then doesn't really commit to saying anything about those themes other than like they're bad, which is, I don't know, I feel like just obvious. Like, yeah, censorship is bad and being anti-immigration is bad. It was frustrating to me that we never saw Simran and Veena actually connecting with their cultures or like even naming their cultures until the end. They stay from this vague elsewhere instead of really feeling connected to their cultures and their culture stories. The final fight ends up being between 2 British figures, the Fairy Queen and I guess King Arthur type figure. And Simran and Veena are kind of like on a third side of like a community that kind of doesn't want to be ruled by either one of those figures, but it's more of a general community is important and the monarchy sucks than like a commentary about that not being their culture and wanting to reclaim their own culture and the monarchy sucking. I felt like that was a shame to me because, again, those concepts were so interesting and like something I feel like you don't see a lot in fantasy. So I wish they had been more forefronted in the story and more deeply explored than just like, I felt like the little, in the first half, the little paragraphs in front of the chapters of these texts that had been written by these authors, commentary, stories, whatever, and then a little like blurb from the Queen's archivist saying whether it was to be published or destroyed or like tracked down, the author tracked down so they would be put in jail or whatever. I thought that was like such an interesting part of the story and like one of the best parts for me, because it was actually engaging with the idea of whose stories get told and how censorship happens and how libraries and archives can be used for censorship and for like cultural hegemony. I don't know if I'm saying that word right. I can see a lot of really great C's in the story, and I just wish it had primarily been a story about censorship, immigration, and defying destiny with like a little side romance, as opposed to their romance being the forefront and those other things being the side plot. I can still see readers really enjoying this story, especially readers who again are looking for something a little bit more romance heavy. Like, this actually reminded me a lot of A Dark and Drowning Tide, which I didn't love, but I know a lot of people did. And again, it's kind of that balance of romance versus plot and commentary to me. So I didn't love it, but I think a lot of other people will, and I'm just happy to see Tasha Suri continuing to write, and again, the cover is gorgeous, so I wish I liked it. Then I read The Way Spring Arrives and Other Stories, a short story collection of Chinese female authors. I'm reading this for a Reddit book club. I really enjoyed the short stories in here, but I think I enjoyed more the kind of essays about Chinese writing culture, especially like online writing culture. I thought those were all so interesting and like such a fun little look into Chinese writing web novel culture. I think the short stories I liked the most were Dragon Slaying, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, Tai Chi Mashed Taro, and The Way Spring Arrived. Then I read Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher. I read Sword Heart and actually really enjoyed it, even though I'm not a huge T. Kingfisher fan, and I'm not a huge romantasy fan either, but I did enjoy Sword Heart, even though I had a couple critiques of it. And so I read Paladin's Grace, which is the series that kind of follows Sword Heart. It's set in the same world and it's about kind of similar characters that pop up in Sword Heart. I feel like this was very similar to Sword Heart for me, and I liked it a little bit less. I felt like it started out very strong and then just had kind of an unsatisfying conclusion. I thought the main character being a perfumer was so fun. I don't know why. That's just like medieval perfume I've always thought was so cool. I love the concept of a pomander. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. The like little thing you wear, the ladies wore on their waists that were full of fragrance. Love that. So chic. Let's bring it back. I'm just a little bit tired of T. Kingfisher's favorite dynamic of like hunky man with trauma who respects women, ex 30-year-old woman who constantly bemoans the fact that she's old and withered yet acts like a 17-year-old girl and is super quirky and chatty. That dynamic is just all over T. Kingfisher's work, and it's just not my personal favorite. And although I liked it in Sword Heart because like Hala was kind of like purposefully playing up how ditzy she was, in Paladin's Grace really is just that ditzy and chatty, and that, I don't know, she got on my nerves. She frustrated me a little bit. Sorry, Grace. But again, I liked the start of the book, and then the second half of the book was just kind of weak to me because the plot is basically completely solved off page, and then it still feels like we haven't gotten anywhere with the kind of overall plot of like the clay heads and stuff. So overall, I did enjoy this book. It just wasn't 100% my favorite, and I do think I like Sword Heart more. Then I read The Test of Extinction by Ray Naylor, which is a novella, and I was not expecting a lot from this novella, but I ended up actually really enjoying it. I thought it was very interesting and had a lot to say about preservation, but also about like the concept of the global south as like an extraction site for the global north to like just take resources from and profit off of those resources, and the people from that land don't see any of the returns and they are just plundered from, basically. I thought that was really interesting. This reminded me a lot of Lee Mandela's Feed Them Silence, which has kind of a similar premise, but I felt like The Test of Extinction executed its premise a lot better, so I would recommend this little novella. And then I read Foreigner by C.J. Cherryh. I read Foreigner from the library, and I loved it so much I bought a copy because I loved this cover. I think it's so like vintage sci-fi. I think Bren looks so cute here, and him and his sexy bodyguards. I love it. Bonichi and Jago. This is my throuple that I'm rooting for. I don't think, like, we're as close to a throuple as you could get in 1994. So I'm pleased with that. But anyways, I absolutely loved Foreigner. This is the story of this like human ship that got lost in space, and then they, in order to refuel, stopped to the nearest planet, let some people off, and then the ship kind of took off and never came back, and the people who were stuck on the planet went to war with the native species, the Atevi of this world, and eventually this treaty got signed where the humans all live on this little island, and one human, the Paidhi, is like the ambassador to the Atevi and like lives with them and like tries to advance human interests, and like their ultimate goal is to create spacecraft so that they can get back to space and hopefully rejoin up with the rest of their crew. But in this book, Foreigner, we're kind of just dealing with the Paidhi Bren Cameron, as he is kind of struggling to figure out whether he has been betrayed by the kind of guy, that the Atevi alien that he trusts. So this book is a lot about miscommunication, culture shock, about the concept of an alien species where they are so different from humans that you just can't assume you know what they mean when they say stuff. Like stuff that would obviously be something to humans is just not something to them. They don't really have the similar concept of friendship and love in the same way that humans have, but they still obviously care very deeply about Bren and like are trying to work with him in the ways that they can. So Bren is really paranoid in this book, and I saw someone complain in the story reviews that he spends a lot of time complaining about his mail, which is true. But I found him to be so charming. I really liked Bran. I thought he was really funny. And I really liked his bodyguards, Benici and Jago. They have been, the way that a Tevi society works is so interesting, and like they are basically, they have Manchi, which is like a biological bond with this person who is higher up with them. They have Manchi to the person that Bren serves, who's basically like the president of the Atevi, and they have been ordered by that guy to guard Brenda. Like, they clearly really like him and like are friends with him, and yet Bren is always just like, no, they could never like me, like they just don't feel like that, like they could never. And they clearly are like really genuinely care about him, and like I love their dynamic in this book and the rest of the books in the series. So loved Foreigner. It hits a lot of my faves. It reminded me a lot of The Left Hand of Darkness, the general concept of like a human ambassador going to a different culture and like struggling to figure out who he can trust and who is trying to betray him. So really loved Foreigner by CJ Cherryh. Then I also read Invader by CJ Cherryh, which is the second book to the series. More of the same. I loved it. Again, the relationship between Benici and Jago and Bran gets even more interesting. There's kind of this flirtationship being struck up between Bran and Jago, his female bodyguard, and it's really interesting because it's like every time he says he likes Jago, he also talks about how much he likes Benici too. So it's like, I'm picking up the vibes you're putting down, CJ Cherryh. I'm picking it up. You couldn't say it. You couldn't have him have sex with Benici as well because it was the 1990s, but I saw your first bisexual protagonist. So yeah, just a lot more of the same stuff I loved in Foreigner. And there's also an alien pizza party in this one, which again I thought was so charming. And then I did read Inheritor, which is the third book in like this first trilogy of the Foreigner books, and really enjoyed that one as well. And I did order that one as well. It's still in the mail. So then I did a reread of Ring of Swords by Eleanor Arneson. Reading Foreigner and Down Below Station by CJ Cherryh just like really made me crave going back and rereading all my favorite like 90s sci-fi, and Ring of Swords is one of my favorites. I love this book, and I feel like no one else has read it. Again, if I can get you to read just one book, please have it be Ring of Swords. This is one of my favorite books along with The Left Hand of Darkness, and I just think it's so fun. It's about a human alien biologist, human xenobiologist, who is trying to prove that this like jellyfish species of aliens on this planet are actually sentient and intelligent, like near human intelligence. No one else believes her, but she is convinced and she's trying to prove it. And then all of a sudden the planet that she's on is being used as a site to negotiate peace between the humans and this species, the Huarhath, that they've been at war with for like 40 years. And so Anna, the biologist, kind of gets mixed up in the peace talks when the humans kind of do something really stupid. And it's all about Anna kind of going and meeting the aliens and the human translator that they have with them. And it's all about, again, communication between alien species, about trust, about loyalty, about what it means to work for someone who has hurt you and who is kind of responsible for bad things that have happened to you, and how you kind of weigh those choices. Like, is it worse to be hurt on purpose, or is it worse to be hurt on accident by someone who doesn't understand you? And I find all those themes really interesting. And then the Huarhath culture is also so interesting. They have a very different yet similar culture to humans, and I think the way it's explored in this book to be really, really interesting. So love this book. I will reread it a billion times. And then I read Down Below Station by CJ Cherryh. This one is, it took me a lot longer to get into than Foreigner. I feel like Foreigner, I just like immediately was super hooked and super interested in Bren and the Atevi and his story. This one is a little bit harder to get into because it throws a lot, and I mean a lot, of proper nouns in history at you in the very beginning, and you're like, I don't understand a single thing that is happening right now. But I felt like around like 40% in, like everything kind of started to click for me, and I just got really invested in like all the various factions and the people working for the various factions. And I think that setup is necessary to be invested in, to keep track of everything that is happening later on in the story. So Down Below Station is about this space station that is kind of the last frontier between these two warring galactic human empires or whatever, and they kind of are trying to maintain their neutrality in the face of this war, and are kind of being pulled between both sides, and the station is getting really full and having trouble accommodating everyone. Really enjoyed this. It's again a lot of political intrigue and a lot of discussions about like immigration and refugees, and like trying to find like independence between two larger cultures, two larger forces than yours. And another throuple in this one, again, as clear as you could make a throuple in 1981. Like, I'm sorry, but like they were hooking up. Like this married couple and this guy that they both become obsessed with. Like, I'm sorry, like what else is supposed to be happening here? They were in a throuple. Thank you, CJ Cherry. I do want to continue on with this series at a certain point. I feel like, again, it was just a little bit harder for me to get into than Foreigner, which I just immediately became obsessed with. So I read Private Rights by Julia Armfield. This was a book that I had that was part of my Read It and Work Week project, where I was reading books that I had on my shelves for a really long time in order to see if I wanted them or to get rid of them. Private Rights, I feel like I just struggled to balance its supernatural and family drama elements. I feel like it either needed to be half the length or twice the length, because neither of those aspects felt appropriately satisfying to me in the end. Like, it just didn't feel like we had enough time. The way that it was implemented, we didn't have enough time to really finish out either of them. So I don't know, kind of disappointing, because I did really like Julia Armfield's other story, Our Wives Under the Sea, but this one was like just okay, and I don't know if I would even recommend it. So then I read The Lotus Empire by Tasha Suri. This is the final book in the Burning Kingdoms trilogy, which I read when they came out, and it's just been a long time, and so I was putting off reading this when it finally came out. But I finally read it, and I actually really enjoyed this. I felt like it was a very competently done final book in a fantasy trilogy. Some stuff kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. This whole like Deus Ex Machina heart's shell thing that like we needed to beat the Yakuza kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. And again, the cardinal sin of this series is that it just has too many POVs, and it introduces POVs for like one chapter that it doesn't need, and then, you know, you never see them again. So I think that this series probably could have stuck to just having like 3 or 4 POVs, and instead it has a lot per book. But other than that, I thought this was a very good, very satisfying ending. It could have been so much worse, and I actually think that the character motivations and the character development was really consistent and strong across the book, despite like it feeling like a lot of the characters were constantly like switching sides or like changing their opinions and their motivations, but those motivations always felt natural and like well developed within the story. So I really do credit Tasha Suri for creating those arcs, those characters switching sides and having it still feel natural. So this isn't like my favorite series or anything, and I did unhaul my copies of the series, but I would still definitely recommend it to people, and I'm still like satisfied with how it was. I just don't feel the need to own the paperbacks. I can get them from my library. They're huge. This is something I don't like about Orbit paperbacks. Those things are like this big and this tall, and like the text on the page is so giant, like they almost feel like large print books. But I do really like this series. And then I finally read He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan. I have been putting off reading this for a long time because I just knew I wasn't mentally in the headspace to be able to read it, and I finally was like, I need to pick it up, because I had, long story short, I had 2 copies of this book, and I was like, I need to get one of those out of here. So I need to read the book and decide which one I want to get out of here. And I read the book, and I absolutely loved it. I really loved this book. I liked the first book as well, and I think I loved this one even more. 5 stars, even though there are like tiny, I think, things I could critique about this book, but like as a whole and as a narrative, I just loved this book so much. I felt like it was done so well. I loved everything this book had to say about gender and sexuality and sex in general and like queer bodies. It was just so good, and it's so dark, and everybody is so miserable, and yet it never feels like too much or just like torture porn. Like there's these moments of levity and there's these moments of genuine joy and happiness that I felt like I really loved seeing throughout the book, and seeing how people even in these bad situations find some measure of love and happiness in their lives. And the ending of this book is actually quite hopeful, and I felt like it didn't feel out of place with the rest of the story, and it just felt like a natural, inevitable ending for all of these characters. And to me, that's the mark of a really well executed character arc and narrative arc, when you just feel like it couldn't have ended any other way for these characters, even though you're like, no, like I wish that hadn't happened to that character, but like that's what had to happen. So I think that this was done really well, executed really well. I looked it up, and I don't see Shelley Parker Chan having anything like on the docket, like any new upcoming releases, which saddens me, but I will be waiting patiently, anxiously, with bated breath for whatever they do next, because I loved He Who Drowned the World. And then I read Sorcery and Small Magics by Micah Ducey. I finally came off hold on Libby, and I was really excited to read this. I thought it looked so fun and so cute, and sadly, it just didn't really work for me. I think a lot of it was the writing style. I'm a first person hater. I don't know why. I know it's really common in romance books, but like that's not me, and I don't want that to be me, and I don't want to be reading it in I perspective, especially with fantasy. I just really struggle with the first person POV. But I also felt like the kind of writing style that this is told in, it's kind of this faux Victorian-ish, formal, old-fashioned kind of writing style. I felt like that style really made it hard for me to get invested in the characters and their romance and like their emotions for each other, because they both are such characters who just are not emotionally open with themselves. Leo because he is always joking around and brushing it off through humor, and Grimm because he's very stoic and like doesn't really let on what he's feeling. We don't have his perspective, we just see him from Leo's perspective, and he's really buttoned up and like doesn't really let on anything much about how he's feeling. So it was just really hard to like read between the lines and read that Grimm actually did really like Leo, or read that Leo actually did like Grimm, because they just were so buttoned up and so standoffish and distant and formal towards each other, and there wasn't enough subtext to really bring out like, oh, they actually really like each other, they just don't want to admit it. I just never really felt invested in the romance, and like I love a slow burn, but like I felt like their dynamic had barely changed by the end of this book, and it only changed because of one of my least favorite tropes in the whole world, which is, spoiler alert, a forced love spell. I just hate that. I really hate that, and I was expecting it like to go a completely different way. I was expecting the twist to be that like the love spell like can't create love, it only like enhances love that's already there, because that's a very common like fanfic trope. But no, it seriously was just a forced love spell. But then like once it wore off, he was like, oh, it's like I still feel that way, so I guess like when I was under that love spell, like I did develop feelings for him. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like that's just so weird, and I don't like that. I don't like that the way they got closer to each other was through forced means. I think that's really lazy and weird and boring, and I don't like it. I also feel like the world of this series, the world building was kind of haphazard and like it not super well done. I mean, it's not horrible, but like it just feels like a very generic fantasy world. It just felt like a very generic fantasy world, and low-key, does anyone else feel like this might be dreary fanfic with the names changed? Because that's just the vibe I'm getting from this. I then read the 10,000 Doors of January by Alex C. Harrow because I had gotten a free copy of it from the library to keep. Like they were doing a book sale, and one of my coworkers just like handed me the book and was like, take this, walk away with it. So it's been sitting on my bookshelf for a while, and I finally decided to read it for this Read It and or Weep project. And yeah, I think it was just a little slightly too young for me. I think I would have enjoyed it if I had read it when I was a little bit younger. It's very much like the coming of age story of a young girl, and like her learning that she can be herself and not have to be like obedient and buttoned up. She can be her authentic, natural, unique self. And I just don't need that story. Like I'm a 23-year-old woman. Like I don't need to be taught that I don't have to be obedient. I already know that. I'm obedient to myself. So I wasn't super invested in the main character and her journey, and I also just thought the pacing of this one was not super great. We are split very heavily in the first half between January's timeline and her growing up with this like guy who's kind of like she's the ward of this rich old guy who like doesn't pay much attention to her, but she still likes, and this like story she finds of this scholar and woman who are from different worlds and then meet each other one day and fall immediately and instantly in love despite knowing each other for one day, and spend like 12 years trying to get back to each other when the doors are closed. And I just was not really invested in that love story, again because I'm just not really a romantic at heart. I can't make myself believe that you can fall in love with someone after knowing them for like 1 hour and spend 12 years trying to get back to them. And then even in the present timeline, January also kind of has this romance going on with this side character, and I didn't feel like he was very well introduced, and I didn't feel like that romance was very well introduced or developed either. Overall, I just felt like the side characters and January just were not super well developed. It was a lot of telling and not showing, and the villains of this are so overly cartoonish, and despite January like acting like the main villain is like this really complex character that she has really complicated feeling towards, like it's so obvious from page 1 who the villain is and like that he's not a good guy. So like I don't know, it just didn't 100% work for me. But like I said, I think it would work better for someone who's younger than me, and I'm still really interested in reading some other works from Alex C. Harrow that I've heard about. So just not for me, and I think some of the elements were a little bit weak, but what can you do? Then I read Wrapup Stories, Transgressive Tales by Aliens by Eleanor Arneson. This is a short story collection set in the Ring of Swords, the Wrapup universe. I love these stories. I read one of them in a class that I took. That was my introduction to Eleanor Arneson. Potter of Bones is in an anthology collection, and it was the first book in that collection, the first story in that collection, and I just loved it so much. I loved the world, and I loved Arneson's prose, and that was what got me to read Ring of Swords. And so it's just every time I reread that story, I'm like, oh, like it's so nostalgic. I love it so much, and I love the concept of this short story collection. It's basically, the framing narrative is that it is a bunch of stories written by Wrapup authors about like taboo subjects that were like either introduced when humans came, or like that have always been taboo, and like they're finally just now publishing it. So I really love that concept, and I love this short story collection. I wish it had a prettier cover because I would love to buy a physical copy, but it's only in this cover. I've then read Blood Child and Other Stories by Octavia Butler. This again is a short story collection from her, and it has some like author's notes after each story about why she wrote it and her advice, and then she also has several essays in here as well. I love Octavia Butler. I think like her work is so freaky yet intellectual, and that's what I love about her. And I also really loved seeing her like writing advice in this. It made me want to start listening to audiobooks, even though I don't really like to listen to audiobooks, just because like I do agree with her that like it's so important to listen to language and like hear how words and sentences fit together and hear what they sound like spoken out loud. So thanks for that advice, Octavia Butler. I think I will be doing that. And I also just think this edition is stunning, and it matches my Parable edition. The I think it's called the 7 Stories Press, and they look so beautiful together. And then I read Paladin Strength by T. Kingfisher. This is the second book in the Saints of Steel series, and I really struggled to get into this one. Like I was 40% of the way through and still just really struggling to read any of it. But then it's almost the opposite of Paladin's Grace, where I really struggled to get into it, but then I feel like the second half was very strong, and like it had a really strong climax and strong plot. Climax, no pun intended, but it had a really strong ending to its plot. It was on page. It was this big chase through a coliseum, like so fun. So fun. I really enjoyed the plot of this one, and I did enjoy that the characters were a little bit different. Like I felt like, okay, they still were a little bit quirked up, still a little bit millennial, still a little bit we're 30 and 40 but act like we're in our 20s, but they did read older than Grace and Stephen, and they did read a little bit more stoic and a little bit more buttoned up than them. They weren't as quirky and chatty, which I did enjoy. They were more unique, and I felt like they actually had like good reasons for not getting together right away. Like I felt like with Grace and Stephen, it was like it's kind of annoying because you're so clearly into each other, and yet they just won't confess to each other for dumbass reasons. But in this one, it felt like Claire actually had a reason to be like, I can't get with you right now, like I gotta go save these other nuns, like I can't fuck you right now, we gotta save my sisters. So I did like that aspect of the story as well. Again, hard to get into, but really worth it. And I did enjoy a lot of the stuff this book was saying about religion, especially in like a fantasy world like this, where religions are like objectively real and like the gods are objectively real, but like some people's gods are dead or whatever. So really interesting commentary about religion, about a society where the government has basically collapsed, of love and the wonder workers. So second half of this book, totally worth it. I really enjoyed this one. And then I reread Witch King by Martha Wells. If you see the bookmark in this and see that I'm not actually finished with it, don't stone me. It's July 31st when I'm filming this. I'm definitely gonna finish this by the end of the day, and I've already read it anyways, so I'm counting it. But I love Witch King. The sequel to this is coming out in October, and I have an arc of it on NetGalley, and they're starting to yell at me about how I need to read it, but I don't remember. I was looking at the summary and I was like, I do not recognize any of these proper nouns. I don't recognize any of these proper nouns or what they mean in this summary, so I need to go and reread Witch King. It's been a while. I read it when it came out in, I think it's like 2023. Yep, I read it in 2023 when it came out. I remember really enjoying it, and it was like one of the first books I had read from Martha Wells. I had tried Murderbot and not really loved it, but I really loved Witch King. I love Martha Wells' fantasy, and it's what got me into her fantasy. So I'm really excited for Queen Demon, and I just love her protagonist. I feel like she writes really fun protagonists. They're like always traumatized and yet like so like charming in a way for me. I don't know. I really love Kai, and he reminds me a lot of Kat from City of Bones by Martha Wells, which is one of my favorite books by her. So I feel like I can definitely see, now that I'm rereading it, I can see a little bit of its weaknesses and a little bit of the cracks, especially in comparison to some of her better older fantasy. But like I still love this book, and I'm still really excited for the sequel. So Witch King by Martha Wells. And that is it. We are finally done. This one was a really long one because I love to yap, and I was like fighting my cat the whole time, but we succeeded. We did it, and I feel like this was a really good reading month for me. So let me know if you've read any of these books, what you think about them, what you've read in July, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.